Today's lecture is on agricultural productivity and the causes of low agricultural productivity in India. The entire issue will be divided into three parts. In the first part, we will be talking about what is agricultural productivity and how is it important for increasing the agricultural output in India. In the second part, we will be talking about the causes for low agricultural productivity in India. And in the third part, we will be exploring the steps or measures that had been taken by the government for improving the agricultural productivity in India. Now, to start with, we all know by now that increasing the agricultural output is very important. It is very crucial for the overall economic development of India. But how can we achieve this? How can we increase the total agricultural output? There are two ways. In the first place, we can increase the total amount of land under agriculture, or we can increase the agricultural productivity. Now, how can we increase the total agricultural land? Let us over here distinguish between agricultural land and cropland. What is cropland? Cropland is the amount of land used for farming, exclusively for farming. And what is agricultural land? It is the land used for farming as well as the land that is used for grazing the cattle. So agricultural land is a broader conception and the cropland is a part of agricultural land. Now, what we can do is we can increase the area of land which is under agriculture or cultivation. Now, in the post-independence period, we have seen that the area under agriculture has been increasing quite substantially and the growth rate has been high. But later on, gradually we find that the growth rate of total agricultural land under cultivation has been declining. Why is this so? This is because we need land not only for agriculture but also for industrialization. We need land for urbanization, for construction of roads, bridges, railway tracks, buildings. We also need to preserve some land for trees and forests so as to maintain the natural ecosystem. So the entire land available in a country cannot be taken away for agriculture. Now, even if we make an international comparison, we find that India ranks 7th in terms of agricultural land, but it has the highest amount of cropland, which means that there is a limitation to further extension of area under cultivation. So, what is the way out? How can we increase agricultural output? The next option is to increase agricultural productivity. Now, what is agricultural productivity? It is the amount of agricultural output that is produced per unit of inputs, and that input can be either land or labor. Now, we find that India has been doing very well in terms of total production, but we find that if we take a comparison with other countries like China, USA, and Brazil, we find that the agricultural productivity is quite low. Right? That means that per unit of land agricultural output as well as per unit of worker agricultural output is quite low. So this means that we have to explore the causes for which the agricultural productivity is low. So now we look into the reasons. Now the reasons can be categorized into three factors. The first is the general factors, the second is institutional factors, and the third is technological factors. Now, if we talk about the general factors, the first factor is pressure of the population on agriculture. Now, we know that most of the population in India depends on agriculture for employment and livelihood, which means that a large number of people are engaged in agricultural activity. This is because there has been inadequate growth in industry, and the small scale industry or the non-farm activities in India in the rural areas have been declining. This means that the dependence of population on agriculture is very high, which means if we look into the per worker productivity, that is the agricultural output per worker, we find it to be very low. And this leads to a large number of disguised unemployment where the marginal product is zero or sometimes even negative. Now, what is marginal productivity? It is the additional agricultural output that is obtained by employing an additional worker. Now, in the rural areas, what we find is that suppose a family has a tract of land and there are suppose 8 members. The tract of land can be taken care of by 5 members. That is, the optimum employment level in the farm is suppose 5. But we find that due to inadequate opportunities outside agriculture, all the 8 members are doing agricultural work. But the 5 is the optimum number of workers, so the additional 3 workers, their marginal product is 0, which means that even if they are withdrawn from this agricultural activity, the output will not be affected. That is, in fact, they do not have any economic contribution on agricultural production. And in many cases, we find that the agricultural tract is taken care of, is worked upon by so many people that the marginal product becomes, in fact, negative. The second point is backward social environment. We know that there is large spread poverty in the rural areas, which means there is nutritional deficiency. The farmers are poor, they do not have adequate income, so their nutritional intake is very low, so they are physically weak. They cannot work much. Secondly, there is widespread illiteracy. Their education level is very low. And there is superstition, widespread superstition, which means that they are hesitant to adopt any new technologies, new methods. They are skeptical about any new innovation. The third point is unfavorable social organization of farmers. This is because of the social structure in Indian rural areas. We still have joint families, and there is considerable rift or differences within the joint families. There is also widespread caste system, right? So this hampers the cooperation among the farmers to innovate and adopt new technologies. In many countries, we find that many small farmers with small tracts of land, they cooperate together and suppose go for mechanization. They buy tractor together, and since buying a tractor is an expensive affair, they share the cost among themselves and they use it individually as well. So this is a very economic form. But in India, because of the rift and differences between the people, between the farmers, this has not been very possible. Next point is land degradation. About 50% of land is degraded. The main reason is water erosion, salinity in water, alkalinity in water. In many areas, fertilizers are washed away by rain. In areas where there is inadequate irrigation facilities and they depend on rain, most of the fertilizers get eroded, and so the soil quality becomes very poor. Next, we move on to the institutional factors. Firstly, the Indian land holdings, the size of Indian land holdings are very low. The first reason is the laws of inheritance. Like we have the rule, the law that when a person dies, the property gets divided among all the heirs. So suppose if a person has a tract of land after his death, the land will be divided among all his sons or daughters, which means that over the generations, the land gets divided into smaller parts. And when the land gets divided, it is uneconomical to go for mechanization. And when the land is very small, it is economical to go for multiple cropping. That is, the intensity of cropping increases. People tend to go for multiple cropping, but the soil quality deteriorates. Why? Because the soil does not get adequate time to recuperate or replenish the nutrients that has been absorbed. The next point is the pattern of land tenure. In the pre-independence era, we know that there was the prevalence of zamindari system, who were the large landowners, and they used to exploit the small and marginal farmers. They used to lease out land to the marginal farmers and the sharecroppers, and they used to extract huge amount of revenues from them. But in the post-independence period, although the zamindari system has been abolished, we find that there still exist large landholders who exploit the small farmers. These farmers do not have rights over the land. There is insecurity about their rights over land. And the large landowner, he can expel the small farmer whenever he desires. So this insecurity or uncertainty demotivates the small farmers to adopt any scientific methods for improving agricultural productivity. The third point is inadequate non-farm services. Apart from production, for good revenue from agricultural output, the farmers also need a sound system for credit and marketing. But the poor farmers, who are largely illiterate, they do not have any knowledge of what are the institutional credit facilities available to them from banks and cooperatives. They are unaware of the government schemes for waivers, discounts, and concessions on the rate of interest on loans. And they are also afraid of the huge paperwork that is required for taking such loans from the formal institutions. For that, what they do is they have to depend on the local moneylenders who they are acquainted with, but these moneylenders charge exorbitant high interest rates from them, and so that they are left with very little surplus for further investment. The storage and marketing facility is not very developed still now, so that the farmers have to depend on traders and middlemen. These middlemen purchase the agricultural output from farmers at very low prices and sell them at higher prices in the market. But they exploit the farmers and deprive them of their legitimate prices. Next, we move on to the technological factors. Firstly, the Indian farmers are still dependent on traditional and obsolete techniques of production. They still use wooden plows, bullock carts, etc. Mechanization and use of tractors, improved pump sets, these are still very rare. Secondly, there is inadequate irrigation. About 54% of land in India is still unirrigated and depends on rainfall. And we know that rainfall is unpredictable, uncertain, and erratic. So the large number of farmers who have to depend on erratic monsoon, they suffer from low harvest. So basically, these are the major causes which leads to very low agricultural productivity. Now, what has the government measures been? What has the government done to improve these drawbacks? Let us take a quick look. First of all, the government has implemented land reforms, whereby it has abolished the existence of intermediaries. It has entailed regulation of rent, security of land tenure, and ownership rights of tenants, so that the tenants do not feel insecure and so that they get motivated to take measures for increasing productivity. They have imposed land ceilings, whereby a certain farmer is not allowed to own land above a certain level, and by this method the land owned by a large number of landowners have been acquired by the government and have been redistributed among the marginal farmers. It has introduced land and water resource management. The government has undertaken many schemes so that the soil is preserved, soil conservation is done, and the main problems like water erosion is mitigated. During the Green Revolutions in 1960s, the government has implemented the use of HYV, or the high yielding variety of seeds, which means those seeds used to yield very high amount of output. Now, the government has taken steps to advise the farmers how to use those HYV seeds, and also regarding what type of soil and what type of irrigation will be suitable for those HYV seeds. Regarding fertilizers, although Indian land is fertile, we find that it is deficient in nitrogen and phosphorus. So the government has undertaken projects to use chemical fertilizers, and it has taken steps to make the transportation and distribution of fertilizers to farmers so that they can use them properly. The government has undertaken a lot of schemes like multi-purpose river valley projects for irrigation. It has constructed dams, canals, tanks, and so on, so that the irrigation system is developed. But we find that this development of irrigation has not been homogeneous throughout the country. In some parts, it has been very good, but in some parts, it still needs to be worked upon. Power consumption is an essential part of agriculture when it goes for mechanization. Suppose pump sets and all those require power. Until now, the government used to give a lot of subsidy for power consumption in agriculture, but still there has been power shortage, thefts, and loss of power. To get rid of this problem, recently the government has launched many innovative models based on solar power, like solar power plants and solarizing existing grid-connected groups. The next step that the government has taken is to increase the cropping intensity. Now, what is cropping intensity? It means that the number of times harvesting is done from a particular tract of land. Now, it is inevitable that if we harvest one crop during a year from a particular tract of land, then the agricultural output will be low. But if the same tract of land can be used for growing multiple crops over multiple seasons, then the total agricultural output will be higher. And the government has taken initiative to encourage the farmers to go for multiple cropping. But over here, we again find that there has been lack of homogeneity among the states with regard to multiple cropping. We find that states like Punjab, Haryana, West Bengal, these have multiple cropping, but states like Orissa, Jharkhand, Himachal Pradesh, they do not have such multiple cropping. The cropping intensity, in fact, is very low. So we can see that there is still scope for expanding the agricultural output by encouraging the farmers throughout the country to increase their cropping intensity. The next step has been taken regarding technology. Now, we know that rather than still using the traditional techniques of production, if modern and scientific equipments and technology is adopted, the agricultural output is bound to increase. And the government has been trying to give full support for this. It is giving credit for buying various tools and equipments to go for mechanization. It has been supporting the farmers to buy pump set and various other modern tools. And recently, there has been tremendous improvements in the technological fronts where interventions have been based on remote sensing, soil sensors, unmanned aerial surveying, and market insight, etc. So, with these steps, it can be expected that the agricultural productivity will improve. About 10 to 30% of agricultural production is lost by the pests. And the government has taken steps to encourage farmers to use pesticides. And again, it has undertaken various schemes for pest surveillance and monitoring the pests and diseases of crops so that the crops are not lost during the entire period. Now, all the commercial banks are bound. It has been made mandatory for all the commercial banks to open branches for providing credit to the farmers. The NABARD has been set up, and different regional rural banks have been set up with the prime objective to provide agricultural loan to the farmers. The marketing system and the storage facilities have also been improved. The infrastructure, the rural infrastructure like roads, railways have been improved so that the marketing, the communication becomes easier for them and they do not have to depend on the intermediaries or the traders. And lastly, the government has made large investments for agricultural research. It has set up different universities and specified agricultural research institutes whose main work is to innovate and find out new methods of agriculture, new methods of farming, new chemicals which are suitable for the crops of different areas, production of HYV seeds, and measures have been taken for soil conservation, crop disease, and improvement of agricultural implements. So basically in this lecture, we have discussed that agricultural output needs to be increased for the overall economic development of India. And for that, it is perhaps not very feasible to increase the land under agriculture. So the agricultural productivity plays a very crucial role. And what are the causes behind the low agricultural productivity in Indian agriculture? And we have seen that social, institutional, economic, technological factors have played very crucial roles in this low productivity. And we have also discussed what steps the government has taken to overcome these causes. Thank you.